So you want to hire me to kill a what? A human? No. I heard you the first time. I just can't believe anyone in the entire galaxy could be that reckless. You do realize who you're dealing with, right? Humans aren't just another target. They're something else entirely. Let me guess, you've never heard the stories? Of course not. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here, asking for something so suicidal. Fine, I'll humor you. But first, let me order another drink. You're going to need one too. The assassin leaned back, his mandibles clicking in irritation. You think, I'm exaggerating? Go ahead, try another guild. See how far you get. The Black Talons, the Void Stalkers, none of them will touch this job. And if you somehow find some lone wolf with a death wish, they'll either fail spectacularly or sell you out to the humans before the job's done. You think humans are just fragile little things, don't you? Oh, they're fragile, all right. Fragile, like a neutron star. One wrong move, and you're dust. The assassin leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Let me tell you something. The only way to kill a human and live long enough to spend the credits is to hit them from orbit. And even then, you'd better have a fast ship ready to jump to another galaxy. Because if you think their vengeance is bad, wait until their lawyers get involved. Trust me, you don't want that. So, tell me, what did this human do to you? Steal your mate? Insult your honor? Or did they just look at you funny? The client shifted uncomfortably. They destroyed my ship. Left me stranded on a moon for weeks. The assassin let out a low, guttural laugh. A ship? That's it? You're lucky they didn't do worse. Humans don't just destroy ships, they erase civilizations. You ever heard of the Zorath Collective? No? Of course not, because the humans wiped them off the galactic map, and you know why? Because the Zorath tried to enslave them. Big mistake. Huge. Sit down, and I'll tell you why humans are the last species you want to mess with. The assassin took a long sip of his drink, his eyes distant. The Zorath were like the Delin, conquerors, slavers, tyrants. They ruled half, the galaxy with an iron fist. Then they found Earth. Thought it would be an easy target. Pre-FTL species, divided into warring factions. Perfect for conquest. They landed, took over, and enslaved the humans. Big mistake. The humans played along for a while. 20 years, in fact. They worked, they bred, they waited. And then, they struck. The Zorath never saw it coming. One day, their supply lines started failing. Ships went missing. Factories exploded. The humans had been reverse engineering Zorath tech the entire time, building their own fleet in secret. When they finally revealed themselves, it was too late. The Zorath fleets were scattered across the galaxy, fighting on a dozen fronts. Humans hit them where it hurt, their homeworld. Within months, the Zorath Empire was gone, just gone. And the humans? They didn't stop there. They liberated every enslaved species in the galaxy, turned the Zorath's own weapons against them. And when it was over, they didn't take over. No, they just went home. Dismantled their fleets, went back to their little blue planet, and started arguing about taxes again. But here's the thing. They left a message, a warning. Don't mess with us. And the galaxy listened, until now, apparently. The assassin leaned back, his mandibles twitching in amusement. So, you see, my friend, killing a human isn't just a job. It's a death sentence. You kill one, and their entire species comes after you. You kill their family, and their allies come after you. And if you're really unlucky, their lawyers get involved. Trust me, you'd rather face a plasma cannon than a human lawyer. So, unless you're planning to flee to another galaxy, I suggest you drop this foolish idea. The client hesitated, then sighed. Fine. But what do I do? I can't just let this go. The assassin chuckled. Insult them back. Humans love a good verbal spar. Or, if you're feeling brave, Challenge them to a duel. Just make sure it's non-lethal. Humans are surprisingly honorable when it comes to that sort of thing, but whatever you do, don't try to kill them. Because if you do, you'll be the one who ends up dead. And trust me, it won't be quick. The assassin drained his glass and stood up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other clients to attend to, less suicidal ones. Oh, and one more thing. If you ever mention this conversation to anyone, I'll deny it. And if the humans come asking, I'll tell them exactly where to find you. Good luck, my friend. You're going to need it. As the assassin walked away, the client sat in stunned silence, staring at the empty glass in front of him. For the first time in his life, he felt a pang of regret. Maybe, just maybe, he'd bitten off more than he could chew. And maybe, just maybe, the humans weren't the monsters he'd thought they were. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to find out the hard way. The client sat there for a long time, his mind racing. The assassin's words echoed in his head, each one a hammer blow to his pride. He had come here seeking vengeance, but now he felt like a fool. Humans. The stories he'd heard about them had always seemed exaggerated, the kind of tales told to scare hatchlings. But now, faced with the cold, unflinching certainty of the assassin's tone, he wasn't so sure. He stood up abruptly, tossing a handful of credits onto the table. The bar was dimly lit, filled with the low hum of alien chatter and the clinking of glasses. He needed air, or whatever passed for it on this station. As he stepped out into the corridor, the cold metal walls seemed to close in around him. His thoughts were a storm. What was he supposed to do now? Let the human get away with what they'd done? Let them laugh at him, mock him while he slunk away like a beaten cur? No, he couldn't. He wouldn't. But the assassin's warning lingered. You kill one, and their entire species comes after you. The client clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. There had to be another way. A way to make the human pay without inviting the wrath of their kind. He needed advice, better advice than what the assassin had given him. Someone who understood humans, who had dealt with them before. Someone unconventional. He made his way to the lower levels of the station, where the air was thicker and the lights flickered ominously. This was the domain of the outcasts, the misfits, the ones who didn't belong anywhere else. And among them, he knew, was a being who might just have the answers he needed. The door to the den was unmarked, but the client knew he was in the right place. He knocked once, twice, and then a third time in a specific pattern. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit room filled with strange artifacts and the faint smell of incense. In the center of the room, seated on a pile of cushions, was a figure shrouded in shadows. "I've been expecting you," the figure said, their voice a low, melodic hum. "Come in, sit." The client hesitated, then stepped inside. The door slid shut behind him, plunging the room into near darkness. The figure gestured to a cushion opposite them, and the client sat, feeling oddly out of place. "You seek retribution," the figure said, their voice carrying an eerie certainty. "But you fear the consequences. You fear the humans." The client nodded, his throat dry. "I do. But I can't let this go. They destroyed my ship, left me to die. I need to make them pay." The figure leaned forward, their features still obscured. "Then you must think like a human. They are not like us. They do not value honor in the same way. They do not fear death as we do. But they have weaknesses. They are sentimental, emotional. They form attachments to their kind, to their possessions, to their ideals. Exploit that." The client frowned. "How?" The figure leaned back, their voice taking on a sly edge. "You must strike at what they love. Not their body, not their life, but their heart. Humiliate them, undermine them, make them doubt themselves. Humans are fragile in ways you cannot see. Break their spirit and you will have your vengeance. The client considered this. It was not the answer he had expected, but it was intriguing. And if I do this, their kind won't come after me. The figure chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Oh, they might, but it will not be the same. They will not unite against you as they would if you killed one of their own. They will bicker, argue, hesitate, and by the time they decide what to do, you will be long gone. The client felt a spark of hope. This was a plan he could work with. Thank you, he said, standing. You've given me much to think about. The figure inclined their head. Remember, vengeance is a dish best served cold. Be patient. Be clever. And above all, be ruthless. As the client left the den, his mind was already racing with possibilities. He would need to learn more about this human, their habits, their weaknesses, their connections. He would need to plan carefully, to strike in a way that would leave no trace. But for the first time since his ship had been destroyed, he felt a sense of purpose. He would have his vengeance, and he would do it without inviting the wrath of the entire human race. But as he walked away, the figure in the den smiled. To themselves, humans, they knew, were not so easily defeated. And this client, for all his bravado, was walking a dangerous path. One that might just lead him to his doom. The galaxy, after all, was full of surprises. And humans were the most surprising of all. The client moved through the station's labyrinthine corridors, his mind a whirlwind of half-formed plans and simmering rage. The figure's words had ignited something in him, a cold, calculating determination. He would not strike blindly. He would not be reckless. He would be patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless. But first, he needed information. He found himself in the data hub, a sprawling chamber filled with rows of terminals and the low hum of processing units. Aliens of all shapes and sizes sat at the terminals, their faces illuminated by the glow of holographic screens. The client approached an empty terminal and inserted a data chip, his claws tapping impatiently on the console. The screen flickered to life, and he began his search. The human who had destroyed his ship, what did he know about them? Not much. They had been a mercenary, hired by a rival faction to intercept his cargo. They had called themselves Jack. Just Jack. No last name, no affiliation, no history. But humans always left traces. They couldn't help themselves. Hours passed as he sifted through records, cross-referencing names, ship registries, and transaction logs. Finally, he found something. A faint trail leading to a backwater system on the edge of civilized space. A place called Epsilon 9. It was a mining colony, barely more than a rock with a few prefab structures bolted to it. But according to the records, Jack had been there, recently. The client leaned back, his mandibles twitching in satisfaction. This was it. This was his starting point. He ejected the data chip and stood, his resolve hardening. Epsilon 9. He would go there. He would find Jack, and he would make them pay. The journey to Epsilon 9 was long and uneventful. The client's ship, a battered freighter he had acquired after losing his last one, was not built for speed. But it was inconspicuous, and that was what mattered. He couldn't afford to draw attention to himself. Not yet. When he finally arrived, the colony was exactly as he had imagined, a bleak, desolate place. The air was thin, the ground rocky and barren. A few domed structures dotted the landscape, connected by a network of tunnels. The client docked his ship at the lone landing pad and stepped out, his senses on high alert. The colony's inhabitants were a mix of species, all of them rough-looking and wary. They eyed him with suspicion as he made his way to the cantina, the only place on the colony that seemed to have any life. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale alcohol and unwashed bodies. The client approached the bartender, a hulking reptilian with scarred scales. "I'm looking for someone," he said, sliding a credit chip across the counter. "A human. Calls themselves Jack." The bartender's eyes narrowed as he picked up the chip. "Jack, huh? Yeah, I know him. Nasty piece of work. Came through here a few weeks ago. Caused quite a stir." The client leaned in. "Where are they now?" The bartender shrugged. "Gone. Took off in a hurry after a job went south. But if you're looking for him, you might want to talk to Zara. She runs the mining ops here. If anyone knows where Jack went, it's her." The client nodded, his mind racing. Zara, another lead. He left the cantina and made his way to the mining office, a squat building at the edge of the colony. Inside, he found Zara, a tall, imposing figure with cybernetic implants and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Jack?" she said when he asked. Her voice was sharp, her eyes narrowing. "Yeah, I know him. They did a job for me. Extracted some data from a rival corp. But they screwed it up. Left a trail a parsec wide. I had to clean up their mess." The client's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Where did they go?" Zara crossed her arms, studying him. "Why do you want to know?" The client hesitated, then decided to play it straight. "They destroyed my ship, left me stranded. I want justice." Zara laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Justice? With Jack? Good luck. They're a ghost, always one step ahead. But if you're serious, I'll tell you what I know. For a price." The client nodded. He had expected as much. "Name it." An hour later, he was back on his ship, a new set of coordinates programmed into the nav system. Zara had given him what he needed, a lead on Jack's next destination. A place called The Vale, a lawless station deep in the fringe systems. It was a dangerous place, even by his standards. But he didn't care. He was close. So close. As the ship lifted off, the client allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He was no longer the fool who had walked into that bar, seeking an assassin's help. He was something else now, something colder, sharper, more dangerous. He would find Jack. He would break them. And he would do it without firing a single shot. But as the stars blurred into streaks of light, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. Humans, it said, were not to be underestimated. And Jack was no ordinary human. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than he knew. The journey to the Vale was fraught with tension. The client's ship, though serviceable, was not built for the rigors of deep fringe travel. The hyperspace lanes were unstable this far out, and the risk of encountering pirates or worse was ever present. But the client was undeterred. Every jump, every close call, only fueled his determination. He had come too far to turn back now. When he finally arrived at the Vale, the station loomed before him like a jagged scar against the void. It was a sprawling, chaotic structure, pieced together from the wreckage of countless ships and repurposed into a haven for the galaxy's most desperate and dangerous. Docking protocols were non-existent. The client simply found an open bay and guided his ship in, his senses on high alert. The air inside the station was thick with the scent of ozone and decay. The corridors were dimly lit, the walls lined with makeshift stalls and shadowy figures hawking illicit wares. The client moved through the chaos with purpose, his eyes scanning for any sign of his quarry. He knew better than to ask too many questions here. The Vale was a place where curiosity could get you killed. But he had one advantage: Zara's information. She had told him to look for a place called the Rusted Spike, a dive bar frequented by mercenaries and bounty hunters. If Jack was on the Vale, that's where they'd be. The Rusted Spike was exactly what he expected. A dim, smoky room filled with the low murmur of conversation and the occasional burst of raucous laughter. The client stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on a figure sitting alone in a corner. A human. Their face was obscured by the brim of a hat, but there was no mistaking the posture. relaxed, confident, and utterly dangerous. The client's mandibles twitched. It had to be Jack. He approached the table slowly, his claws flexing at his sides. The human didn't look up, but the client could feel their attention shift, like a predator, sensing prey. When he was a few steps away, the human spoke, their voice low and gravelly. "You lost, friend?" The client stopped, his heart pounding. "I'm looking for someone, a human, calls themselves Jack." The human tilted their head, the brim of their hat lifting just enough to reveal a pair of piercing eyes. "You found him. What do you want?" The client hesitated, his mind racing. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. But now that he was here, face to face with the human who had ruined him, he felt a flicker of doubt. The assassin's warning echoed in his mind. Humans are not to be trifled with, but it was too late to back out now. He squared his shoulders, his voice steady. "You destroyed my ship, left me stranded. I want answers." Jack leaned back in their chair, a slow smile spreading across their face. "Answers, huh? That's a new one. Most folks just want revenge. But you're different. I like that." The client's claws twitched. "Don't patronize me. I'm not here to play games." Jack's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Neither am I. So let's cut to the chase. You think I owe you something? Fine. But here's the thing. I didn't destroy your ship because I wanted to. I did it because I had to. Your cargo? It wasn't what you thought it was. And the people who hired you? They're not who you think they are." The client frowned, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" Jack leaned forward, their voice dropping to a whisper. "Your cargo was a bioweapon, designed to wipe out entire colonies. The people who hired you, they're part of a syndicate that's been testing it on fringe worlds. I couldn't let that cargo reach its destination. So yeah, I destroyed your ship, and I'd do it again." Client stared at Jack, his mind reeling. It couldn't be true. Could it? He thought back to the job, the secrecy, the urgency. Had he been used? Played for a fool? Jack watched him, their expression unreadable. "I'm not your enemy. But if you want to make me one, that's your call. Just remember, you're not the first to come after me, and you won't be the last." The client stood there, torn between rage and doubt. Everything he thought he knew was crumbling. But before he could respond, a loud crash echoed through the bar. He turned to see a group of armed figures storming in, their weapons drawn. They were mercenaries, their faces set in grim determination. Jack sighed, standing up and brushing off their coat. "Looks like we'll have to finish this later. Those guys? They're with the Syndicate and they're not here to chat." The client's eyes widened as the mercenaries spotted Jack and opened fire. Chaos erupted as patrons dove for cover. Tables were overturned, and the air filled with the sound of blaster fire. Jack moved with practiced ease, ducking and weaving. Through the chaos, returning fire with deadly precision. The client hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to run. But something held him in place. Jack's words echoed in his mind. "I'm not your enemy." Was it possible? Had he been wrong all along? As the firefight raged around him, the client made a decision. He drew his own weapon and took cover behind a table, his eyes locked on Jack. If the human was telling the truth, then they were both in danger. And if they weren't, well, he could always settle the score later. For now, survival was the only thing that mattered. And if that meant fighting, alongside Jack, so be it. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The bar was a cacophony of blaster fire, shattered glass, and the guttural shouts of mercenaries. The client crouched behind an overturned table, his claws gripping his weapon tightly. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, confusion, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. But there was no time to dwell on it. The Syndicate's mercenaries were closing in, their weapons trained on Jack, who was darting between cover with the agility of a seasoned fighter. Jack glanced over at the client, their eyes sharp and calculating. "You gonna help, or just sit there and look pretty?" they called out, their voice cutting through the chaos. The client's mandibles twitched in irritation, but he didn't hesitate. He leaned out from behind the table and fired a precise shot, taking down one of the mercenaries. Jack grinned, a flash of teeth in the dim light, and returned fire, dropping another attacker. "Not bad," Jack shouted over the din. "For a rookie." "I'm not a rookie," the client snapped, his pride stung. He fired again, this time, hitting a mercenary who had been trying to flank them. The body crumpled to the floor, and the client felt a grim satisfaction. He might not have all the answers, but he wasn't about to let these thugs take him down. The firefight raged on, but the tide was turning. Jack's skill was undeniable, and the client's precision was a deadly compliment. Together, they picked off the mercenaries one by one until the bar fell silent, save for the crackle of sparking wires and the groans of the wounded. Jack stepped out from behind their cover, their weapons still raised as they scanned the room. "Clear," they said finally, lowering their gun. They turned to the client, their expression unreadable. "Thanks for the assist. Didn't think you had it in you." The client stood, his weapon still in hand. "Don't thank me yet. I'm still not sure I believe you." Jack shrugged, holstering their weapon. "Fair enough. But if you're going to shoot me, do it now. Otherwise, we've got bigger problems." The client hesitated, his claws tightening around his weapon. He wanted answers, but Jack's calm demeanor was disarming. "What do you mean, bigger problems?" Jack gestured to the bodies scattered around the bar. "These guys, they're just the tip of the iceberg. The Syndicate doesn't take kindly to people messing with their plans. And now that they know I'm here, and that you're with me, they're not going to stop until we're both dead." The client's mandibles clicked in frustration. "You're saying I'm a target now because of you?" "Pretty much," Jack said, their tone annoyingly casual. "But look on the bright side. Now you've got a chance to make things right. Help me take down the Syndicate, and maybe you'll get your answers, and your revenge." The client stared at Jack, his mind racing. He had come here for vengeance, but now he was being pulled into something far bigger and far more dangerous. Could he trust Jack? Or was this just another game, another layer of deception? Before he could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Jack's eyes narrowed, and they motioned for the client to follow. "We need to move, now." The client hesitated for only a moment before falling into step behind Jack. They moved quickly through the station's labyrinthine corridors, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. Jack led the way with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the veil, their movements swift and deliberate. As they rounded a corner, Jack suddenly stopped, pressing a hand to the client's chest to halt him. Ahead, a group of Syndicate enforcers was setting up a barricade, their weapons at the ready. Jack cursed under their breath and glanced at the client. "Got any bright ideas?" they whispered. The client's mind raced. He wasn't used to this kind of situation, running, hiding, fighting in the shadows. But he wasn't about to let Jack see him falter. "We go through them," he said, his voice low and determined. Jack raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing on their lips. "I like your style. Let's do it." Without another word, they charged forward, weapons blazing. The enforcers barely had time to react before Jack and the client were upon them, their combined firepower cutting through the barricade like a hot knife through butter. The fight was brutal and swift, and when it was over, the corridor was littered with the bodies of their enemies. Jack leaned against the wall, catching their breath. "Not bad," they said, glancing at the client. "You might just survive. This, after all." The client didn't respond. His mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, the firefight, the revelation about the Syndicate, the uneasy alliance with Jack. But one thing was clear. He was in too deep to back. Out now, where to next? He asked, his voice steady. Jack pushed off the wall and started down the corridor. We need to get off this station. The Syndicate's got eyes everywhere, and it's only a matter of time before they send more goons after us. I've got a ship docked on the lower levels. If we can reach it, we might just have a chance. The client nodded, falling into step beside Jack. For better or worse, they were in this together now. And as they moved through the shadows of the veil, the client couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever. And somewhere, in the depths of his mind, a small voice whispered that he might not survive to see the end of it. But for now, he pushed that voice aside. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let Jack or the Syndicate get the better of him. The lower levels of the veil were a maze of rusted metal, flickering lights, and the constant hum of machinery. The air was thick with the scent of oil and decay, and the distant echoes of alarms and shouting only added to the tension. Jack moved with purpose, their boots clanging against the grated floor, while the client followed close behind, his senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every corner a potential ambush. As they approached a junction, Jack held up a hand, signaling for the client to stop. They peered around the corner, their eyes narrowing. "Patrol," Jack whispered, pulling back. "2 enforcers, armed to the teeth. We can't take them head on, not without drawing more attention." The client's mandibles twitched in frustration. "Then what's the plan?" Jack smirked, pulling a small device from their belt. Distraction. They activated the device and tossed it down the adjacent corridor. A moment later, a loud explosion rocked the station, followed by the sound of shouting and running footsteps. "Move," Jack hissed, darting across the junction with the client close behind. They slipped into a maintenance hatch, the narrow passageway barely wide enough for the client's broad frame. Jack led the way, their movements swift and silent, until they emerged into a dimly lit docking bay. There, nestled among a cluster of derelict ships, was Jack's vessel, a sleek, modified freighter that looked like it had seen its fair share of battles. The client couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration. The ship was a far cry from his own battered freighter, and it was clear that Jack had invested a lot of time and credits into keeping it in top condition. Jack sprinted toward the ship, their hand already reaching for the access panel. "Come. On? We don't have much time." The client followed, his claws clicking against the metal floor. As they reached the ship, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the docking bay. Jack cursed under their breath and quickly input the access code. The hatch hissed open, and they both scrambled inside, sealing it behind them just as a group of enforcers burst into the bay. "Go, go, go!" Jack shouted, sprinting toward the cockpit. The client followed, his heart pounding as the ship's engines roared to life. Jack slid into the pilot's seat, their hands flying over the controls as the ship lifted off. The enforcers opened fire, their shots pinging harmlessly against the ship's hull. "Hang on," Jack warned, pulling the ship into a sharp ascent. The client grabbed onto a nearby console as the ship shot out of the docking bay and into the void of space. Behind them, the veil grew smaller, its jagged silhouette fading into the distance. Jack leaned back in their seat, letting out a long breath. "That was too close," they muttered, running a hand through their hair. "But we're not out of the woods yet. The Syndicate's got ships patrolling this sector, and they'll be on us like flies on a carcass." The client straightened, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Then what's the plan? We can't just keep running." Jack glanced at him, their expression serious. "We're not running. We're regrouping. The Syndicate's got a facility in this system, a research outpost where they're developing that bioweapon. If we can hit them there, we might be able to shut this whole operation down." The client stared at Jack, his mind racing. "You're talking about a suicide mission?" Jack shrugged. "Maybe, but it's the only way to stop them. And if you're still looking for answers, that's where you'll find them." The client hesitated, his claws flexing at his sides. He had come this far, driven by a desire for vengeance, and a need to understand the truth. But now, faced with the reality of what Jack was proposing, he felt a flicker of doubt. Was he ready to take on the Syndicate? Was he ready to risk everything? Jack seemed to sense his hesitation. Look, I get it. This isn't what you signed up for. But if we don't stop them, more people are going to die. Innocent people. You think they care about collateral damage? They'll wipe out entire colonies. Just to test their weapon. Is that what you want? The client's mandibles tightened. No! Then we're on the same page, Jack said, their voice firm. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we make sure they can't do this again. You in? The client met Jack's gaze, his resolve hardening. He had come too far to turn back. Now, and if there was even a chance he could make things right, he had to take it. I'm in, he said, his voice steady. Jack grinned, a spark of determination in their eyes. Good. Then let's get to work. As the ship hurtled through the void, the client felt a strange sense of clarity. The path ahead was dangerous, and the odds were against them. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was fighting for something bigger than himself. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever. And as the Syndicate's outpost loomed on the horizon, the client knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The ship's engines hummed steadily as it cut through the void, the stars stretching into streaks of light around them. Jack's hands moved deftly over the controls, plotting a course that would take them to the Syndicate's research outpost. The client sat in the co-pilot's seat, his mandibles twitching as he stared out at the vast expanse of space. The weight of what they were about to do settled over him like a heavy cloak, but there was no turning back now. We'll drop out of warp in 10 minutes, Jack said, breaking the silence. Once we're in range, we'll need to move fast. The outpost's defenses are no joke, but if we can disable their comms array, we'll buy ourselves some time. The client nodded, his claws flexing. And the bioweapon? Jack's expression darkened. If we're lucky, we'll find it in their lab. If we're not... They trailed off, their jaw tightening. Let's just hope we're lucky. The minutes ticked by in tense silence, the only sound the steady thrum of the ship's engines. As they approached the outpost, Jack brought the ship out of warp, the stars snapping back into focus. Ahead of them loomed the Syndicate's facility, a sprawling, angular structure bristling with antennae and turrets. It was a fortress, cold and unyielding, a testament to the Syndicate's reach and power. Jack activated the ship's cloaking device, the hull shimmering as it blended into the darkness of space. This'll get us close, but it won't hold. Forever, they warned. Once we're inside, we'll have about 20 minutes before they realize something's wrong. The client rose from his seat, his movements deliberate. Then let's not waste any time. They moved quickly, donning lightweight armor and arming themselves with whatever weapons they could carry. Jack handed the client a compact plasma rifle, their eyes meeting his for a brief moment. Stay close and watch your back. This place is a death trap, the client nodded, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. You too. The ship's hatch hissed open, revealing a narrow docking tube that connected to the outpost's airlock. Jack led the way, their movements swift and silent, the client following close behind. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, and they stepped inside, the sterile metallic scent of the facility filling their nostrils. The corridors were eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of machinery. Jack motioned for the client to follow, and they moved through the labyrinthine halls with practiced ease. Every step felt like a gamble, every corner a potential threat. But they pressed on, driven by a shared determination to see this through. Finally, they reached the lab. The door was sealed, but Jack quickly bypassed the security system, their fingers flying over the keypad. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room filled with rows of containment units and glowing monitors. In the center of the room was a large cylindrical tank, its contents swirling with an ominous greenish liquid. That's it, Jack whispered, their voice tight with anger. The bioweapon. The client stepped forward, his mandibles twitching as he stared at the tank. The thought of what this substance could do, the lives it could destroy, filled him with a cold, seething rage. We need to destroy it. Jack was already moving, pulling a small explosive charge from their pack. This'll do the job, but it's going to bring the whole place down on us. We'll need to move fast. The client nodded, his claws tightening around his rifle. Do it. Jack set the charge, their hands steady despite the urgency. As the timer began to count down, they turned to the client, their expression grim. Let's go. They sprinted out of the lab, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the corridors. Behind them, the charge's timer ticked away, each second bringing them closer to disaster. They reached the airlock just as the first explosion rocked the facility, the force of it nearly knocking them off their feet. Go, go, go! Jack shouted, shoving the client into the docking tube. They followed close behind, sealing the hatch, just as another explosion tore through the outpost. The ship's engines roared to life, and Jack pulled them away from the facility, the outpost disappearing in a blinding flash of light as the charges detonated. The client slumped into his seat, his chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. Jack let out a long breath, their hands still gripping the controls. We did it, they said, their voice barely above a whisper. It's over. The client looked out at the debris floating in the void, the remnants of the Syndicate's outpost. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a sense of peace. The weight of his past, the guilt and the rage, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. He had fought for something bigger than himself, and in doing so, he had found a measure of redemption. Jack glanced at him, a faint smile playing on their lips. You did good back there. The client met their gaze, his mandibles twitching, in what might have been a smile. We did good. As the ship hurtled through the void, the stars stretching out before them like a sea of endless possibilities, the client felt a strange sense of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and there would be more battles to fight, but for now they had won. And in the quiet of the cockpit, with the hum of the engines and the glow of the stars, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future worth fighting for. The Syndicate was gone, their bioweapon destroyed, and as the ship disappeared into the vast expanse of space, the client knew one thing for certain. This was not the end. It was a new beginning.